This, let's say, authoritarian regimes, they knew that the culture with all these, elements, universities, grammar school, galleries, philharmonics, and so on, this is very good surrounding to make a new man.
Although this cultural institution that I studied, the Hungarian Academy of Arts, would like to become this, let's say, cultural vanguard of the regime that shapes the entire population or the entire nation, it has actually, in most of the cases, a really limited outreach.
You're listening to This Authoritarian Life, a podcast in which we explore everyday human stories to make sense of authoritarian politics. My name is Kristóf Nagy.
And I'm Erdem Evren.
So, dear listeners of This Authoritarian Life, welcome back. This is episode 3 of season 2, Frontlines. And this episode is going to be a bit special in the sense that it's growing out of a workshop that all 4 of us who are in the conversation attended back in October. So the workshop's title was Culture in Authoritarian Transformations. It was organized by 2 friends of us, who I'm going to name, Katarina Stetsevich, who works for the Federal Agency for Civic Education, and Jens Adam, who is a scholar like us and works on authoritarian transformation himself. And we were invited by them to continue the conversations that were held in Cottbus. And the participants came from all around Central Europe. So they were people from Serbia, from Italy, Poland, Slovakia, Eastern Germany. And they were artists or cultural managers or people who had held posts in cultural institutions or studied them. And we had discussions around what happens when, an authoritarian transformation kicks in around you and you're one of these institutions. And of course, it was mostly people who weren't aligned with the authoritarian powers. So I think most were liberals or on the left. And we had very, I think, intriguing and important discussions around this topic of what these pressures look like and how you can react to them, how we can collectively react to them. And so we decided to invite 2 people from that workshop who we are going to introduce. And I'll just say a very few words about how we're going to continue this conversation in the podcast, in the episode. So the first guest we have is Piotr Rudzki. He's a literary scholar and dramaturg who helped turn the Polish Theater in Wrocław into one of the country's most daring, I would say, public stages. His vision of a global theater that engages societal issues head-on came directly into conflict with the vision promoted by the conservative cultural elites who came to power in 2016. And we'll talk about what that means in practice, because Piotr was removed from his job due to these clashes, culture war, basically. And he went on to found the Polish Theater in the underground. So, starting a new institution from the grassroots. And Erdem, can you introduce our second guest?
Sure. Our second guest is another Kristóf Nagy, who recently completed his PhD in anthropology on conservative cultural policy in Hungary. His ethnographic research at the Hungarian Academy of Arts, which is one of the flagship public institutions created after Viktor Orban's Fidesz party came to power in 2010, offers a deeper insight into how right-wing cultural institutions are making an effort to integrate artists with clashing different visions. Kristóf is currently a postdoctoral fellow at Princeton University, and he's actually speaking to us from the US. Welcome to This Authoritarian Life, both of you.
So I think we'll start with Piotr, but I just want to say, why these 2 people and what we hope to get out of the conversation. So I think, they're situated in 2 very different places, Hungary and Poland, and also 2 very different cultural institutions. And we thought that one of them, Piotr can talk a lot about what culture war looks like up close, and how you kind of deal with it on a personal and collective level. But Kristóf worked in a very different environment in which this culture war frame, understanding doesn't really work. So it's going to push us beyond kind of the culture war paradigm, because you see that an institution in which people who disagree on fundamental value grounds are still together, not always working together, literally speaking, but are somehow still collaborating in the same institution. So we'll learn about how the hell that works.
Starting from 2006, for about a decade, Piotr, you worked together with your colleagues to transform the Polish theater in Wrocław into a place of intellectual dialogue, moral confrontation, and maybe even most importantly, artistic experimentation. And your colleagues and you were insisting that this is a theater that belongs to society, not to the authorities. And you have staged different forms of critical public dialogue, and you promoted the model of global theater. So, what was the overarching vision behind this work related to the theater? And maybe what were your kind of influences, inspirations? What were maybe some of your interlocutors in the global theater scene? Could you tell us a bit about all this?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me for this conversation, which seems very interesting. And, we don't have half a day or one day to talk about all inspiration and all, let's say, food for thoughts, which were for us important to create this institution. I prefer call it Polski Theater in Wrocław because, this is the name of the theater, because Polish means all the theaters in Poland. So the Polski Theater, when we start working there in 2006, that was, quite, he used to have good moments in past. For sure, but I'm not going to repeat all the history because this stage became Polish after 1945 when the Wrocław, previous Breslau, became the Polish city. And what was very important, what I would like to underline, that first Polish president who was Drobner and who came to Wrocław in, I think, July 1945, he also invited to his group one guy from Polski Theater in Kraków. So, the people who were supposed to organize the new life of the city also were thinking about, the theater. And there are many anecdotes and many histories, but I'm not going to touch it anyhow. Otherwise, we are going to spend whole night talking about this. Anyway, what was very important, starting from 1945, that the good management of the good management was changing. Took into consideration that first of all they should prepare the audience. The theater is not just for entertainment, and the theater should somehow reply or conduct good dialogue with the audience. And if we think about the Lower Silesia, which Wrocław is the capital, the mostly people who came, they were, let's say, from two groups of people, workers and peasants. So to have the audience for the production, they have to teach them what is the theater, which is not only entertainment, which is not only summer stage, to give some variety or anything like this. But so after 45, there was a, let's say, constant process, but with some breaks of, teaching the audience and preparing the new coming audience to contact with something which is more difficult as far as piece of art is concerned. If you think about the construction, and if you think about, not only, let's say, realistic or not realistic theater, which are, let's say, art progressive theater. So we knew this from the very beginning, and when we came in 2006, that was after the, let's say, 5 or 6 years gap. So we started our working day in the theater with few courses for teachers, for pupils, for, let's say, ordinary audience, just to give them the idea what is theater about. And and what's very important, and this is not very difficult things to collect, think about Aristotle and his poetics, the kind of catharsis, which could be also, the kind of emotion which should be arise. So it means that the subject of the production, the idea, and as well as the how the production looks like, should somehow touch the audience. Then I would like to mention one guy whom you probably not know, because this is the Polish romantic poet Adam Mickiewicz. Before his death, he spent 4 years in Paris, having lectures in Collège de France, and very important lecture, we call it lesson number 16, and it was 40s, so beginning of 19th century. What he'd underlined that, that the main aim of the theater is what he said, to make lazy souls to be active, to make lazy souls, let's say, to think. So the theater, in this, let's say, serious kind of discourse in Polish theater, means that the theater is something serious. And then we have Grotowski, and if you probably know, Grotowski shifted from Opole in 1964 to Wrocław. So I mean, let's say we had foundation, we had the ground which we can use building the new repertoire. The idea was also to invite the young generation of the theater directors, really young, those who didn't have the opportunity to create something on the other stages, as well as trying to attract, let's say, masters. The last thing I would like to underline, when the problem started in 2015, when let's say this right-wing party won parliamentary election, we were supported by the audience. That was something absolutely unique in history of any European country or any other country, that that when the problem started, we had the representative of the audience. They created fan page, the audience of Polski Theater in Wrocław, and they push authorities, Wrocław authorities, Lower Silesia authorities, as well as the, let's say, central authorities, just to give us absolutely unbelievable support. That was for us, being in a very difficult situation, some bright point, bright feeling that something which we have done last 10 years had really good result in this action.
So can you tell us about the conflict? How did it erupt?
I mean, the conflict was, very simply, that was the end of the contract of Krzysztof Mieszkowski, the manager and artistic director with whom I used to work. And we were asking, because the Polski Theater is founded by the Lower Silesia government, and some foundations are also coming from the ministry, but the main decision point is Lower Silesia government. And we were just trying to make them to prolong this contract, trying to showing them that, any change in that point of the process, which is just on in the theater, is really something horrible. It's really killing something which was really alive. Unfortunately, they didn't agree. They didn't prolong this contract, and they just opened the competition. And when they opened the competition, we knew that we would lose. There was a guy who was
competition for the new artistic director.
General and artistic director.
General and artistic director.
Yeah, and we knew who is the person who was chosen by ministry, and this guy had quite bad reputation, and I was even in this jury. Which was supposed to choose the new artistic and general director, and everything was set. Everything was set. We knew there was Krystian Lupa, me, and one more theater director, Paweł Łysak, was, let's say, on our side, and we just saw that everything is done in a way to make this guy new director, and when it was chosen, me and Krystian Lupa just decided, didn't sign the protocol of this meeting. We just left the place without an explanation, and then in fact started something really unusual also in history of Polish theater and art as such, that the huge manifestation, really huge, were organized in Wrocław, in order to support us and in order to fight with this very bad decision.
We'll come to that, but first of all, you didn't mention what your role was in the theater, like what you were doing. And
All right.
second, can you also tell us what was so provocative about the theater as far as the government, the party was concerned? Like what
was
made
provocative?
them, yeah, exactly. What made them not renew the contract of the artistic director and kind of appoint this government apparatchik of sorts, I guess?
About my position, I was literary manager, and also some theater directors like Jan Klata or Barbara Wysocka or the others. They invited me to be, let's say, dramaturg while the process of creating production. Even when we create with Dresden Theater. Shakespeare, Titus Andronicus, there were two dramaturgs. One was Ole Georg Graf from German theater, and me, I was from the Polski Theater. So something which was let's say the spark which provoked this absolutely big anger against our theater was the production directed by Ewelina Marciniak. She's now very well known theater director in Germany. She's working in Hamburg and in the other theater, so now she's more often working there in Germany than in Poland. Anyway, Ewelina Marciniak were preparing with us Elfriede Jelinek's Death and the Maiden, and she decided that that just to show this kind of reification of women in a patriarchal society, she wanted to hire two porno stars, if I can say like this. That was really a little bit funny. Nobody from Polish, let's say, porn industry decided to take part, so we found a couple from Czech Republic, and they took, and what was very, unusual and against the law in Poland and against the, let's say, constitution, that that the Ministry of Culture, they decided to implement censorship, but not the censorship which could be, let's say, somehow implemented after the opening, or censorship shouldn't be implemented. I'm sorry to say this. If they decided that this is something against the law, something against the public sphere, they should just go to the court. They just sue us. But they choose the other way. So his director of the cabinet wrote a letter to the Marshal of Lower Silesia asking Marshal to cut, to not allow to premiere this production. And I can say now this is kind of anecdote, but even the nephew of Jarosław Kaczyński, Marta Kaczyńska, who has nothing in common with the theater. She's just, the daughter of the previous president who died in Smolensk. Even she wrote, let's say, essay against our theater, and that is something. It was against the, in her opinion, against the way to treat theater as a church.
I would like to come to Kristóf just for, I want to bring him into the conversation because something not exactly similar, but some happened in Hungary that I think reminds one of the story that Piotr just told, because there the National Theater also became kind of, the central terrain of battle where, as Piotr is explaining, a certain way of approaching theater was not only criticized, but, shown as a morally reprehensible approach that kind of undermines, national well-being or as you said, desanctifies the place. So Kristóf, what Piotr explained, what kind of bells does it ring in your head? Was what happened in Hungary similar?
I mean, in a certain sense, yes. So there was a kind of this politically loaded takeover of the Hungarian National Theater in the early 2010s. I do not remember the exact year right now, around 2013 or something like that. And I think what was kind of peculiar in the Hungarian case, from a retrospective perspective, is the fact that actually, on the one hand, there was this really conscious or really determined project to take over, get rid of the liberal theater director, and so on. But I think there wasn't really a plan what comes after. I mean, there was a new director, who is Attila Vignyánszky, who is still running the theater, but I think he is doing not necessarily the kind of theater that you would associate with a right-wing authoritarian regime. He's running a kind of experimental avant-garde, post-avant-garde theater, so he is not necessarily the theater maker who would attract, I don't know, millions of audience. So in this sense, it was a kind of, I think, the entire story of the Hungarian National Theater, and I have not really researched it, so it's this kind of primary interpretation that's just coming right now from my perspective, that okay, we are getting rid of the liberal cadres, but actually that isn't necessarily a really clearly crafted strategy that what comes after. And I think that's something that is a kind of inherent feature of this authoritarian cultural policies, and probably every cultural policy, that there's a lot of contingency in it. So I mean, it's not necessarily a super well crafted master plan that okay, but I mean, even these authoritarian regimes have a kind of limited number of cadres who they could mobilize. So in this sense, they do not necessarily have the perfect match for every position. Rather, it's, if we step into their perspective, and I think that's usually a quite inspiring or tricky but inspiring task to do, we can realize that, okay, from their side, it's also a kind of crisis management. Okay, how to find a theater director who is more or less sharing our values and still can run a theater that is attracting an audience, and so on and so on. And not so easy project as you would think. And it's a time-consuming process to raise this kind of new class of, let's say, artists or intellectuals, or if we open up more broadly, experts and technocrats who are ready to align with such kind of regime. So what I see, at least in Hungary, not necessarily in the field of arts and culture, but more broadly in the scale of art experts working with and in the regime, I see that actually there is now a young generation, maybe in their late 20s, early 30s, who were kind of already raised in this regime and who are kind of more automatically engaged with its politics. So in this sense, I think it's not a impossible project to raise this kind of new cadres, rather a time-consuming and energy-consuming and money-consuming process. So yeah.
But would you say in both of these countries that culture was like an important point was it kind of in the central interest of both governments? Was it at the top of the list that, we want to do this and that, follow these goals, put these people into positions, or would you say that it wasn't amongst the top concerns of both ruling parties?
Maybe in the Hungarian case, I would say that what was a kind of central concern to unmake the previous, let's say, liberal hegemony. And I think crafting a new, let's say, right-wing cultural hegemony is not a top priority anymore. But really unmaking and undermining the previous, let's say, regime where mostly liberal figures were ruling and running key cultural institutions, that was, I think, a top priority. And that was a project that I think Viktor Orbán's regime quite successfully completed by the mid-2010s.
But if we treat, culture wider, if you just mentioned, education, and higher education, and all general education. So it means, I mean, they had, as far as Poland is concerned, they had program, and and one general thing that came into my mind when I was thinking about our meeting, that starting from Lenin, who said that the most important art is film. So I mean, this, let's say, authoritarian regimes or governments who are on the way to authoritarian regime, they knew that the culture with all these, elements, universities, grammar school, galleries, philharmonics, and so on, this is very good surrounding to make a new man. That was the dream of communists. That was a dream of fascists or Nazis, just to rise a new man who will not doubt, who will just, follow the ideas. And, it was real, I remember I talked about this in Cottbus, that, before 2015, they had this pre-election congress, this Law and Justice Party in Katowice, and, the lady who was then the deputy minister of culture, she said openly, I mean, nobody in that time, just took care about this, but she said openly, we are not going to ban, we are going to not give money. And fortunately, as I said also in Kodus, in Poland we have this two system governing. One is a central government, and that was Law and Justice Party, and the other one is local governments, and the third one is the mayor, the municipal government. And fortunately, all this level of governing of Poland were not taken by Law and Justice Party. So the kind of protest, protest and fight against these changes could be created.
I want to let Erdem ask a question, but I cannot, I think we should briefly discuss this creating new man thing, because it kind of now occupies the whole room. So I wanted to, or for me it does at least. So Kristóf, is this a prism through which you read right-wing cultural policy in Hungary?
I mean, I definitely agree with the part that Piotr said, that popular culture has a definitive role in this, any kind of crafting hegemony and cultural hegemony. And I think this is not necessarily the feature of only or the exclusive feature of, let's say, right-wing regimes. If you think about the post-World War II US hegemony, it was much more based on Walt Disney than how much it was based on Jackson Pollock. So if we have a look on just on cultural production. So in this sense, I believe that, the popular culture has an important role, and maybe I would add that besides movie and film production, I think architecture is really important, because architecture is probably the only form of culture that everyone has to consume. You don't really have a choice. You have a choice. I mean, of course, you can discuss how much is it a choice, but let's say that you have a choice to go to a gallery or not to go a gallery, to go to a theater, not to go a theater. But when you are walking in a city or in a town or a village and you are confronting with these buildings, you don't really have an option to at least to see them or not see them. So in this sense, I believe that architecture is also really important.
Absolutely.
And but at the same time, I think this kind of making of new man is a tricky question, I think, because especially because this cultural institutions have a, let's say, limited social reach. So, and that was a kind of key takeaway of my own research in the Hungarian case, that although this cultural institution that I studied, the Hungarian Academy of Arts, would like to become this, let's say, cultural vanguard of the regime that shapes the entire population or the entire nation, it has actually, in most of the cases, a really limited outreach. And I think that's something that we should keep in mind, that the ambitions are not equal with the results, and the results are far more fragmented than the ambitions. And although their own propaganda or their own mission statement, if you would like to use this kind of business language, is to, let's say, to craft a new cultural backbone for the Hungarian nation, their practice is much more about crafting new funding schemes, defunding, let's say, liberal cultural projects and funding, let's say, right-wing cultural projects, but definitely not rewriting the mindset of the nation, I think.
I mean, fortunately, but if you have a look, sorry for this very tragic example, but if you have a look on North Korea, and in a, let's say, smaller extent China, it means that such project could be developed, with the aims the authoritarian government just decided to take. So I mean, unfortunately, we could mention a few examples, but fortunately, I don't know, Kristóf, maybe you have better idea, but maybe because of internet and because of the kind of freedom which one can access because of internet, this could be not so easily done in Europe. But in China, you can't use Google. When I was in China with the theater, with the woodcutters, Holt Fallen, we can't use Gmail, we can't use Google. So these tools of communication could be also controlled.
I mean, I'm listening to this conversation, obviously thinking of many, many examples from Turkey. I mean, the party state has been in power since 23, 24 years by now. And from the very beginning, I think the party state, Erdogan, really had this agenda of creating a new man and really very actively had this desire to shape the cultural sphere as they see fit. But on the one hand, I think to this day we say that culture or cultural sphere is the area, the realm that the AKP, the Justice and Development Party, has been least successful in controlling and managing and penetrating into, if you like. In the sense that, I mean, still to this day, the most prestigious publishing houses are, left-wing or left-liberal. The most prestigious theater companies are, left-wing or left-liberal. Of course, there are some popular cultural figures who are on the sides of the AKP and the regime, but there are many, many, famous singers, famous artists, famous actors who kind of occasionally or regularly voice their criticisms, voice their opposition, which happens to be important for the regime. So there is that. But on the other hand, I think, as you said, Kristóf, and you, Piotr, actually, like when it comes to shaping the new man, I think, let's say, making the education more religious, for example, is definitely a much more concrete and important goal rather than having this or that theater or appointing this or that person. Or I don't know, like bombarding the society with certain conservative norms with regards to family or family life or against LGBTQ. These are the top priorities, I would say. But in any case, once to come to Kristóf's point, yes, or what both of you said, yes, it's difficult. Yes, it requires new cadres. But after 20 years, I think, or 20 years may be enough time to grow these cadres that can also be quite functionally important in these cultural spheres. And second, you may not maybe conquer the museums and the publishing houses and the theater companies, etc., but you can also manage them through a system of rewards and punishments. So just like you said, there is no money for those filmmakers who are critical of the regime. There is no money for those artists who are critical of the regime. I mean, the biggest modern art museums may be run by private companies or funded by big rich families. But yes, you will also make sure that they will also follow the line and not touch on sensitive topics. My sense is that I think kind of what the AKP has achieved, is not that unimportant on the one hand, but also it hasn't completely monopolized the cultural sphere either.
Kristóf, you want to jump in? Maybe, I mean, it's also the time to bring in the say a bit more about the institution that you did research in.
I wanted to jump in by saying that I think what Erdem said, and I really agree with that, or I would bring the same kind of argument through the Hungarian case. And I think it's an exciting kind of combination of this kind of neoliberal logic of funding and cultural funding with this kind of authoritarian regime. So yeah, as Piotr also said, it's not a question of censorship or not censorship, but rather, oh, we don't have money. Oh, sorry, you didn't get this grant in this competitive grant scheme, and so on and so on. So in this sense, I believe that, yeah, it's a really, really telling, let's say, encounter of authoritarian policies realized through this, let's say, neoliberal settings. And let me add just one point, and I think it will be directly related. I believe that the success of cultural policy under Viktor Orban could be explained, at least partially, by the fact that they could enter to a really defunded cultural scene. So actually, they could really increase cultural fundings and at least reintroduce some, let's say, welfare benefits for artists and intellectuals that were existing under socialist times in a more expensive way, and they at least partially reintroduced some of these welfare measures that was really a game changer for many artists and intellectuals, and not necessarily for those who were exhibiting in Berlin, who were touring in New York, and who were, I don't know, showing their films in Cannes, but really for those rank and file artists and cultural producers who were trying to survive from a 200 euro pension. And for them, these welfare measures were really game changers, and I think in this sense that that the fact that the cultural scene was so defunded or underfunded was really a reason why these new cultural policies could achieve a certain kind of success quite quickly.
Absolutely.
But Kristóf, tell us a bit more about how this works through this institution that you did research on.
So I studied the Hungarian Academy of Arts, which is let's say a cultural flagship institution of Viktor Orban's regime. It is even mentioned in the current Hungarian constitution, which is quite atypical for a cultural institution. And it is not a teaching institution. It's important to mention. It's rather an organization that aims to unite the cream of the artist. It has around 350 members, and just to go back to the welfare measures, these 350 members get a really decent lifetime annuity. So they get a fixed monthly amount of money until they die. It's around 1,000 euro or 1,200 euros, which is really a serious money especially for artists in Hungary. And I think one more aspect of this institution that is really telling, that it was, let's say, it was funded 2 times. First, it was funded in the early 90s as an NGO of the right wing circus, but it was really although it was called as Hungarian Academy of Arts, it was really just a small NGO established by 20 artists. And actually, when Orban came to power in 2010, they, let's say, elevated or scaled up and elevated this institution into a state body, and this is the moment when it started operating as a branch of the state responsible partially for arts and culture. And I could study this institution, and I think it's a kind of really great case to understand how cultural policy works, because it also had a, let's say, mediating role between the artist and the state. Since it's consisted of artists, it's not purely a top-down, let's say, transmitter of any governmental will or power, but it is at least formally a democratic institution when artists elect new members among themselves. Artists make decisions. So in this sense, I think it's a kind of retelling case how this right-wing or authoritarian cultural policies works, and which are really often going beyond this kind of top-down control that is, let's say, this really common perception of them, that okay, only the strongmen are governing the culture and governing the country, and purely everyone is just transmitting their will. No, not at all. Actually, there are these really rich, socially embedded organizations which have an important role in mediating these wills, but also shaping these governmental policies.
Would you call it co-optation or?
Yes, I think co-optation or clientelism they are also all great words. And co-optation is especially a good word to describe it, because it is not only co-opting or not only working with, let's say, right-wing artists or artists who were, I don't know, nationalists already in 1978, but they are also co-opting, let's say, former established figures of the, let's say, previous liberal hegemony who are not so political, or who are, let's say, ready to accept this kind of new material benefits in return of some alignment with the regime. Or they are just maybe just truly believing that they could somehow improve Hungarian culture through this institutional settings. So I think there is a lot of true belief and true determination to do something for the country in these institutions, not only cold-minded people.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, I know a few people who, or know people who know other people who are in this organization. I obviously don't want to name them at this point. But something I noticed is, and I think that's also important here, is that the fact that you are working in such an institution, even though you may have diametrically opposed values and ideas about how the world should be, it really impacts you when you kind of live from the money of the regime. It somehow, I noticed, it has an impact on people. It tends to, I'll be blunt, disempower critique, because it draws them into a dance with power in which they are empowered. And I think this is what Kristóf was saying, that you have agency, even though you're not running the show, but you do have agency. So you're in this space which is asymmetric from a power perspective, but it's not like you are a puppet moved around. So I think it's a quite clever way of reorganizing cultural space, because it tends to, we use the word hegemony, but I guess to capture the mood, it makes people a bit more complacent and less ready to confront. Is how I experienced it when I was close to this. But I don't know, does this resonate with you, what I'm saying?
I mean, I just wanted to reflect to your earlier point on how, let's say, working in an institution shapes consciousness, and I think that's important. So it's not purely there. So the question of funding and the question of ideology are not separate things, I believe. So it's definitely not my invention. We can really go back to Karl Marx and the social existence determines consciousness thing, and I think that's practically we can witness really in the same thing in this institution. So as somehow starting to be working in and for this kind of institution, it shapes consciousness, and I can connect it also to my own personal experience. So as I started working for the Hungarian Academy of Arts, I did a participant observation there. So I was interning for them for a year. It brought a lot of actually sympathy, let's say disturbing sympathy in myself, that, okay, I like these guys. Oh, he's really nice. He has some really great points about the global capitalism and so on and so on. So I didn't become a fan of the institution, or I didn't become a member of the institution, but actually the fact that I was spending there a year, it definitely shaped my consciousness. So in this sense, I can really imagine that being a kind of permanent member of the academy and getting a decent salary from there, how it shapes consciousness, and how it kind of gives people or gives the members of the academy kind of power, when they can imagine that, okay, until this point I was just this helpless artist who was completely exposed to funding schemes, and now finally I am the one who is deciding on grants and could kind of shape cultural policy in this micro level, because of course these artists are not really deciding on the big monies, just on the small monies, but they still have a kind of power over funding.
And that was my idea why I mentioned woodcutters. I don't know if you read the novel written by Thomas Bernhard, Woodcutters, Holzfällen. Yeah, so this is, I mean, if you don't read, I mean, this is about how the artist could be corrupted in a sense, by the, let's say, system of grants, system of money. So, I mean, they met after quite long time. They met during the dinner, and, they, with the narrator, Thomas Bernhard, who is just, telling them, what did you do with your life? You just sell your artist, you sell your art because of money, because of grants, and because of all this, hierarchy, being higher in a hierarchy, being in a power, what Kristóf just said. So that was the idea why I mentioned this. Just Kristóf remind me.
Shall we then come to another issue that has been also partly touched by both of you, which is the possibility of an independent, autonomous, even dissident cultural production in the times of authoritarianism? So, Piotr, I mean, you have more practical to say about this. After you were fired, you established an underground theater. Maybe you can tell us about your practical experience of this.
I think the most important thing, if I look at all this, what happened, till today after 2016, I have to mention that the most important thing is that we set up, let's say, networking during these 10 years, networking of the people whom we can ask for support. So this is the first. Second, this is very difficult to tell by myself, but we really established the theater on a very high aesthetical value. That was something which was really done not commercialized, and it was received not only in Poland, let's say all over Europe. So we had, let's say, background. We had the power from this background to talk to these members of the local governments who were not the members of the central government. That was the case of Jacek Sultry, who is nowadays mayor of Wrocław. In that time, he was the director of the Department of Social Issue in municipality of Wrocław. And, that was the second or third person whom we met and showing our production and just asking, help us. And he watched it and he decided and he just valued it as something which is really valuable, and he helped us. And he's helping till today, frankly speaking. We have foundation, so we're trying to apply for money from the different sources. And as I said earlier, the most important thing, because during the communist time there was no way out. The central government was the same, that the local government and regional government. Now, because this government is separated, let's say somehow, the power is more how to say in English,
fragmented.
Yes, fragmented. So this is the way how one can survive.
But was it easy to get, people who used to work for Polski Theater into your underground thing? I mean, was it seamless?
We did it. We did it as a group. Some of us were fired. The others, like a few actors, were still hired by the theater, but working already in that time, working, let's say, in the underground. For me, the most difficult situation was when the new manager, he started on September 1st, 2016, and I was that time in Japan talking about Woodcutter's Holzfällen, because the show was going to be presented there. And I came back and I knew that this man is a disaster for this theater. So I should, to some extent, behave as he was just my boss. And after work we were just doing our own jobs. So, but he just decided. He decided in December 2016 to fire me. So then my brain, my conscience was absolutely clear. I didn't have, this, I don't know if you know the novel written by Czesław Miłosz, where he presented the state of mind which we called Ketman, that you don't believe in the system, but you are trying, to behave as if. So, it was, of course, about, communist time, but to some extent, little extent, I felt the same for the September, October, November, and half December. It was really horrible.
So what I hear is that, you create your own community, not only, passive spectators or followers, but really a community that would come to support you, stand together with you in difficult times. And second, kind of trying to flourish at the cracks, formed by these different scales of power, like local, municipal, national, etc. Kristóf, do you kind of observe something else in Hungary?
When I am thinking about alternatives, it goes back to, let's say, my diagnosis of where could this right-wing infrastructure build up quite successfully. And I believe that it was a kind of successful project in Viktor Orbán's regime because it could really kind of exploit the material grievances of artists and intellectuals. So in this sense, when I'm thinking about alternatives, it's definitely, those are definitely alternatives that are also tackling these material grievances, but not by co-opting them into let's say, right-wing authoritarian regimes, rather in a democratic way. For example, by establishing trade unions for artists and intellectuals who are really fragmented, to bring back the word, who don't really have a strong bargaining power, or they have bargaining power only in an individual scale, but definitely not in a collective scale. And I believe that, for example, crafting this kind of structures of solidarity, which can be trade union. Not only trade unions can offer, of course, structures of solidarity. So I strongly believe in this kind of solidarity-based alternatives, which are not only tackling the, let's say, the ideology of the regime, but also the, let's say, material foundations of the regime, or they are doing the two at the same time.
But do you have examples that, of such initiatives actually getting off the ground and surviving?
Not necessarily from Hungary, so it's also wishful thinking. I mean, I have friends and colleagues who started recently working on trade union for culture producers, but they are really doing the first steps, so it's too early to make a judgment on their project.
So I think maybe the powerscape isn't just fragmented enough in Hungary, and it's not a joke that I'm bringing here, but really it's a difference between, I think, Poland and Hungary. As Piotr explained, there is a municipality in Wrocław who can be convinced of the value of what they're doing. But then back to you, Piotr. So how does, if you compare your life from before 2016, when you were the artistic director, to, now you're still the artistic director, but of the underground theater?
Artistic curator, we decided not to build, let's say, very complicated hierarchy. We would like to make it, flat.
You're already beginning to answer my question. So what's the difference in the life of your pre-life and your contemporary
the difference
life?
is, it's much more difficult, to run together. I'm not running myself. To run the group where the all decisions are taken in democratic way. This is really, democracy. We know this is very difficult system, and we decided to create something like committee of underground, and this committee consists of 7 people. Take, let's say, everyday decision. We meet on this every week basis, and we just take this decision. But to some extent, I never thought that I would say this, what I'm going to say. I'm glad, I'm glad that, this happened, and because, this also meant, that we should be ready to cope with very different situation, thinking about our professional life, about the other aspects of our life, and I think this is kind of experience which also gave me a lot of fruits. Of course, it's much more difficult. It's less fruitable as far as salary is concerned. But it's we are not. I mean, I work at the university. This is my main place of hiring. But I'm glad.
And if you have to compare, you said there's two types of right wing in Poland, basically, who now alternate in power. So have things changed in that regard, since it's no longer the arch conservatives, but the more liberal conservatives who are in power?
Yeah, I mean, we don't feel this pressure, which was given by all statements given by ministers and prime ministers during that time. I mean, as far as I receive it, there's no such, let's say, ideology sold to the public. But the situation is also more difficult because of the war in Ukraine. So I mean, a lot of funds should be spent there. And for me, it's quite obvious that the people there should be helped. That this is something really. I'm sorry for the last digression. Last week, the guest from Lvov University visited us. We have this kind of agreement, and every year our students go there, and their students come here. Of course, our students didn't go because of the war, but they come every year. And the teacher who came with them, when they arrived in the place where they were going to have rooms, and that was a high-level building, and students asked on which floor they are going to be put, if the lower or higher, and the teacher was surprised. They thought, when the alarm is going to be from the lower level, we are going to quicker find our place to survive. So this is something which we forget, which in everyday life we forget about this, but the war is really something absolutely horrible.
Thank you for making the time. It actually worked out very well, I would say.
Yeah, and thank you for inviting and creating this space for sharing thoughts.
Thank you very much also from my side.
Great. Thank
both
you.
of you.
That was really great, yeah.
So that's it from us for today. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
We would also like to thank our contributors: music and mastering, Shai Levy; artwork and graphics, Polina Georgescu; editing, Vera Jonas; and our in-house communications advisor, Anna Szilágyi.